Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I don't know why I just struggled saying afternoon, but good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this lovely Tuesday for another one of our awesome webinars in our educational webinar series. Today, we're going to be covering some recruitment operations best practices with one of Recruiting Daily's favorite people, Steve O'Brien from Monster. So before we get into all of his expertise, as usual, I do want to cover a few housekeeping items for you. As always, you're in listen-only mode, so you're going to be able to hear Steve. You're going to be able to hear me when I interject with questions. However, we can't hear you. So what we're going to need you to do is use that control panel to ask questions and raise your hand just in case there's anything that you're not sure of or want some more information on. So please use your control panel, ask questions. If you'd like to follow along online, our hashtag is RDaily, that's short for Recruiting Daily. And also want to just quickly shout out our sponsors for today's webinar, My Ally and Breezy HR. So just another quick reminder, listen only mode, take notes, ask questions. Awesome shout out to our sponsors. And as always, we will get you a copy of the recording and the presentation within 24 hours. So don't worry if there's something you miss or you don't understand, we're going to get a copy to everybody. So without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and Steve is going to start talking, and he's just going to get us through the next about 45 minutes to an hour or so of expertise on best practices in recruiting. So Steve, take it away.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Alexis. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to our friends out on the West Coast here. So appreciate you dialing in and spending some time talking about recruiting fundamentals here. So just to sort of set expectations, our objective here throughout this webinar is really to get to a point where we can all return as recruiters and leaders in TA to kicking our feet up and living the good life in talent acquisition, right? It's the nature of what we do, right? We just want to return to it because the work that we're in, we have complete control over the hiring manager and the market and the candidate. So we just need to get a few things tightened up, and then, of course, we get right back to relaxing. So by way of a quick introduction, as Alexis said, I'm Steve O'Brien. I'm the Vice President of Talent Fusion at Monster Worldwide. Talent Fusion is an agile recruiting services firm nestled nicely here within Monster Worldwide. And I wanted to take some time this afternoon to talk about recruiting fundamentals. In order to pin that down, I thought I'd try and position it a little bit in some point of view that I start with, right, so that you know where I'm coming from, and maybe a little bit of, where does this fit within a TA maturity perspective. Let's start there, right, so that we can understand, whether this, ties nicely to where you guys are in your journey and how to think about, if it's too basic, you can understand why, or if it feels like too much of a stretch, you can also understand why. If we look at the Deloitte stages of maturity, right, where stage one is basic and transactional recruitment, I think most of us are probably beyond that. And when we look at this, I'm assuming as we make some of these recommendations that we have gotten to a point where recruiting is a process and some of our fundamentals are tied down around having an ATS and systems of record and documentation. When we look at the next stage, standardized and focused, this is where we begin to perhaps have some applicability for the fundamentals that we're going to discuss, and maybe just emerging or beginning to touch stage three, which is integrated and evidence-based. All right, so somewhere between stage two and stage three is where I hope that we're hitting in TA maturity. All right, so I've been in recruiting for about 15 years. I got into recruiting out of my undergraduate degree. I did an undergraduate in philosophy, which you do if you want to be unemployed or you want to go to grad school. I wanted to go to grad school. I did. I started dating a girl that was better looking than I deserved, and I dropped out of grad school and I chased her. My father was very proud, right? One of those moments. Turned out she's my wife, the mother of his two grandkids. So it was a worthwhile bet, but it did leave me with a bit of a pickle initially out of my undergrad, and that was, what am I going to do with a philosophy degree? Recruiting was one of those domains where your pedigree was not as important as your impact, right? So I had an opportunity to join a staffing firm. I actually started with a company called Apex Systems, and I got into contract recruiting and fell in love, right? I certainly didn't expect that, but it is what ended up happening, right? So over the years, I've worked on the agency side. I did a lot of contingent recruiting as well. I took a brief stint in executive search, which I'll tell you about here in a second, and then got into recruitment process outsourcing somewhere around 2010. So the brief stint in executive search was a pretty important experience for me. It's actually what led me into recruitment process outsourcing, where I spent most of my career, maybe though through an unexpected path. So around 27 years old, I was wrapping up with Apex Systems because I'd gotten to the point that many of us get to where we're absolutely convinced we're being underpaid, right? We can all think back to that point in our career where you know you are worth so much more than you're being paid. So I was at that point, and I was going to go get mine. I was going to go and join an executive search firm and finally, be compensated for what I was worth as an outstanding recruiter. Turns out there's a lot of culture fit, and there's a whole bunch of other things that go into success in executive recruitment. And at 27, I didn't quite have it. 9 months in to my work with that firm, we were on a casual Friday, and my managing director walked in and came over to my desk, and I didn't have my collar stays buttoned down. And he says, "O'Brien, it's casual, it's not a frat house." And I looked up, and as you do when you're 27, he was wearing white linen pants and a floral print shirt. And I said, "I know it's not a frat house. I didn't know it's a luau." And that was my last day in executive search. But it was a really good thing because it created the opportunity to change and the opportunity to move into an aspect of recruiting that's been a source of passion for me for about the last 8 years. I took that opportunity to go join a small emerging RPO, and then in 2010 joined a company called Connexa, who some of you might remember, and then transition with them to IBM before joining Monster here within the last about 18 months. So the perspective that I bring into recruiting is certainly a fairly process first or process forward perspective. And from a design perspective, I marry that tightly with the way that we construct our teams, right? So here at the top, you see a belief I bring into this is that process design and organizational design are and must be closely related. You'll also notice if at any point I sound a bit grumpy about the way that people view talent acquisition. I love the Burson model, right? And every year Burson also releases a metric that makes me cringe. It's an accurate metric, but it still, makes me cringe. And it's the percentage of senior executives that don't think talent acquisition can keep up with the talent demands of their organization. The reason that drives me a little crazy is everybody has an opinion about what recruiting should be doing. It's a little complicated though, and there's a lot of nuance into figuring out how exactly to manage our desk and stay on top of being as optimized as possible when we don't actually control the hiring manager, the market, and the candidate. So, just in good spirits, every once in a while you hear me grind a little bit on the fact that everybody's got an opinion. When we're looking at process design and recruiting fundamentals, another aspect that I bring in is making sure that we're keeping a consideration around the mental bandwidth of everybody that's in the process, right? So the two key groups that are often a focus point for me are the mental bandwidth of the recruiter and the mental bandwidth of the hiring manager, right? If we design a process or we focus on fundamentals that really can't fit within the capacity of the average recruiter or the average hiring manager, we may have a very optimized process that has significant rate limiters at a key customer intersection or a key user intersection that's going to cause us some challenges. The fourth thing, I'm very suspicious of the panacea du jour. For those of us who have been in recruiting for a long time, we have each year sort of on the dot been told that there is some new solution out there that's either going to solve all of our recruiting problems or it's going to continue to accelerate the question of will recruiters be replaced by machines? Dun, dun, dun. In all the years that I've been recruiting, we've not quite gotten there. I don't think that we're quite there yet. And so if I come across as sort of iconoclastic against technology, I assure you I'm not. I'm just a bit resistant to the idea that there's a panacea right around the corner that we just need to wait and find and apply, and then all of a sudden recruiting is going to be easy. Recruiting's tough, right? And there's a lot of customers and a lot of factors that we've got to balance. And then the final thing that I bring into the conversation, I recognize that talent acquisition means a lot of things to a lot of different companies. Some of us might be doing, tens of thousands of hires a year. Some of us might be doing less than 100. Sometimes it's staffing a call center. Sometimes it's a whole bunch of highly skilled individuals for a consultancy firm. The recommendations that I make, they do depend a little bit on the process that you're running, right? So I recognize if as you listen to this, you think, I'm not exactly sure how to apply it, or yeah, that's spot on. It may be derived to the fact that the TA organizations that I've run are similar to the TA organizations you're running, or maybe a bit different. So what kind of companies have I worked with? I've primarily worked with companies that want to make between 3,000 and 6,000 hires a year, and the average salary for the companies that I support tends to be around 70 to 80,000. It's a pretty significant average salary, I recognize, but that's the background that I'm coming from. All right, so we want to talk a little bit about how do we get some fundamentals optimized and make sure that they're dialed into the way that we're running our TA organizations. I like the conversation a whole lot, but I've found over the years that having this conversation, it's more effective when we go back to our why, right? So I told you that I got into recruiting out of my undergrad and I fell in love with it. Many of us on the call have a similar experience. For me, getting into a job where I could make a lot of money, especially if I was really good at it, was very, very satisfying. But making a lot of money for me wasn't the hook. It was seeing the way that making a difference in candidates and hiring managers' lives was important and satisfying. There was a sales guy that I worked with a couple of years ago. When I told him that, he sort of rolled his eyes and like, yeah, we all say that. No, honestly, I think for a lot of us in recruiting, there is a why. And I think for many of us, the ability to make a difference in the world is a significant why. So as we talk this through, what I'm proposing that we're doing as we get these operational fundamentals tied down is that we're removing some of the distractions that prevent us from doing what we came here to do, right? We came here to make a difference. We came here to make a difference for our candidates, for our families, and for our hiring managers, right? And as life gets complicated and as recruiting gets complicated, blockers pop up, right? And they pull us off of our plan. Each year I go around and talk with talent acquisition leaders, and not surprisingly, part of the conversation is, what are we trying to accomplish, right? So the why is, in particular, how we're going to make a difference in the world through our company, right? And we've got a whole bunch of tactics. These are the 6 priorities or tactics that I see a lot of TA leaders focusing on and that come up most often when I ask leaders, what do you want to accomplish this year? What are your must-accomplish goals? On the left-hand side, there's some familiar friends, right? These are the goals that we can't ever get away from. They show up in different shapes and colors every year. So we've got improved quality, right? So quality, that's always there. In the middle, we have manage costs, right? That never goes away. And then on the bottom left, we have reduce time to hire, right? Everybody always wants better quality at a lower cost faster. Yeah. And that I don't think is going to change for us. And then on the right-hand side are priorities that are coming up more and more often as I talk to leaders in 2018. Diversity, automation, and consumer level experiences. It's very hard to focus on these higher order priorities, right? Diversity, automation, and consumer level experiences when we have difficulty getting our process to flow smoothly and we have difficulty operating within our budgets. So I hope as we talk that we'll identify some ways that we're able to decrease pressure on our budget by increasing the efficiency of our core process. Before we jump into increasing our efficiency of our process, we do have to figure out what are we going to do around solving for the question of technology today, right? We can't talk about recruiting without talking about what is the tech stack that we're going to run going to look like. In order to take a look at technology, I think it's fun to go through the history of the recruiting black box, right? Because I think some technology today is in that string, right? So those of us that have been recruiting for a while, remember the original recruiting black box. The original recruiting black box was literally a black box in the room where we stored all the resumes. Yeah. Then we got to a point where we had online databases, right? And we had sourcing ninjas. These were glorious days for recruiting. We had curated databases, and the better recruiters were the ones that did a better job navigating and mining those databases, right? If you've still got sourcing ninja on your LinkedIn page, it's time to take it off. But that was a wonderful day. When we realized that the curated databases were only a part of the picture, and that we could go out and we could find candidates in their native territory, right? We could go out and stitch together a whole bunch of different social communities and user-generated databases. We started to put together the sourcing science, right, idea. And how are we going to go out and how are we going to, at scale, navigate through multiple databases and pull all this talent together? It turned out that when we pulled all that talent together, we found out that those individuals weren't necessarily candidates, right? Those were just individuals. And we began looking at how social recruiting was going to motivate those individuals. And a lot of the recruitment marketing and drip marketing campaigns began coming into fad and talent communities so that we could take individuals from all these different databases and make them individuals that actually were willing to listen to our recruiting pitch. And then finally, where we are today, we're all waiting for Rosie to take our job. Hint, it's not going to happen. So how are we going to focus on getting through the question of technology and back to making sure that we're identifying the recruitment errors, I would say, that are increasing our effort, and how are we going to dissolve them? The first is applicant value leak, right, which is making us work harder than we need to. The second is hiring manager influence leak, which means that we're losing control of our desk. And the third is executive alignment leak. We're walking into battles and we're having conversations with our businesses, and we're losing to escalations, or we're losing to being overruled by our executives. In the last 7 years, there's been $9.2 billion dumped into HR technology. For those of you that were just at HR Tech, it was a great event, and it's certainly a strong illustration of how much money is being poured into innovation and generating a solution for some of the complexities in recruitment right now. The challenge is that this is creating many more options than we have the ability to process. If you're wondering how it is that you get a different cold call from a different organization every week, each with their own breed of AI, it's because this is what happens when you give $9.2 billion to 28-year-olds in Silicon Valley. This is a quick visualization from HR Tech Labs that shows some of the startups, and some of them at this point aren't even startups, but some of the organizations that are moving into our space and saying, here, if you want to solve your fundamental recruitment problem, you need to consider this, or you need to apply this. It's very, very distracting. It's very, very difficult to navigate. When we look at that technology, a couple patterns are worth considering. One, that technology is overwhelmingly focused on organizations with under 10,000 FTEs. 80% of venture dollars are going to startups that are target marketing the quote unquote mid-market, so organizations with less than 10,000 FTEs. Many of them as well are going into artificial intelligence driven solutions that are making a ton of progress, but are not quite yet ready to take over recruiting, right? So AI has accomplished amazing things. It beat Gary Kasparov at chess. It beat Ken Jennings at Jeopardy. It is now the world champion in Go. And most recently at Carnegie Mellon, it actually beat a team of professional poker players at poker. But it's not yet ready to take over recruiting. A couple of the trends in TA that I talk with people about and want to help them prioritize are on the screen. The full Harvey ball is a trend that I think you need to take very seriously, right? An empty Harvey ball is a trend that I think that you have the ability to put aside, right? For one of two reasons. Either it's not producing the results that it's promising, or it isn't mature yet, right? It's not something that we actually need to move forward with. On the bottom, you see I put artificial intelligence at 25%. Part of that reason is just to get a little bit of a reaction, right? Because artificial intelligence is so much of a focus right now. The other is the feedback that I'm getting from talent acquisition leaders is it's still not at a point yet where it's ready to deliver the value that it's proposing. There are some applications and there are some really great organizations that are doing cool stuff. But I just had a conversation at HR Tech with an individual that leads recruitment for a fast food chain in the south of the U.S. And they were betaing it to improve some asynchronous candidate experience, right? So just a chatbot. And there were a lot of difficulties in producing human level or consumer level candidate experiences through the chatbot. That doesn't mean it's not possible, but it does mean that there's still a little bit of a road to go in getting all of that to be configured and producing the experiences that we want. Now, employee reviews, candidate relationship management, assessments, these are absolutely things that we need to be thinking about as we're putting together our tech stack. But how do you pick, right? How do you figure out of all of these technologies, which ones are going to be the most important for you in your particular organization? Going out to the market and coming forward with a broad question, a question like, what do you have for me, leads to a bit of choice overload, right? And it makes it very difficult to select and figure out which technologies are going to be important for me. So I'm going to encourage that we actually pause, right, before going out to the market and look internal and figure out how do we get our own operation as it stands today optimized as far as we can before going out and asking the question, once we have our baseline, right, once we're at a stage 2 level of maturity, what technologies are going to push us forward? What we need to start with is establishing our messaging. We need to make sure that the applicant base that we're drawing is as broad and robust as possible. For those of us that have already established an EVP, excellent. For those of us that haven't yet, we need to make sure as recruiters and TA leaders that when we're going out to market, we're maximizing the value of our applicants. There is no more effective channel from a cost perspective than getting the right applicant at the right time for the right job. Establishing an EVP is critical to make sure that when we go out to market and say that you should consider my job, that we're able to tell candidates and prospects why what we're doing in our organizations matters and why they should care about what we're doing. Now, historically, the relationship between marketing and talent acquisition has been somewhat challenging, and it's no more challenging than any internal relationship, but getting an EVP off the ground can be difficult. So what I offer is the encouragement that if you are struggling with getting an EVP off the ground, don't hold yourselves accountable or require that you get a fully baked, fully rolled out, marketing endorsed EVP off the ground. There are simple little ways that you're able to communicate authentic messages and give visibility into aspects of your organization that give candidates a peek beyond the job description and help you add depth and richness to your job postings. Simple statements from your hiring managers and from your employees about why they've joined the company that you work with, why the work that they're doing matters to them, and what keeps them excited about the future are extremely powerful and extremely resonant messages. It doesn't have to be highly produced. As a matter of fact, the research right now is showing that a less produced message is actually more impactful to the marketplace. We live in a generation right now where if something is too refined, it feels like it could be a positioning statement, right? And so when we look at getting an EVP or getting some authentic communication off the ground as step 1, less refined language, less refined production quality, communicating real messages from our hiring managers and our employees is highly impactful. When we're looking to optimize, this is step 1, and it's a critical step because it's going to lead to a higher, more vibrant basis of applicants. As we refine our messaging out to the marketplace, the objective that we're accomplishing is we're maximizing our free traffic, right? The days where you had to pay for job postings for everything are quickly dwindling. There's an incredible amount of traffic with Google for Jobs and organic search, pulling together all of our different job postings into places where candidates can go and find them, and largely go and find them for free. The reason that we want to go and find how to maximize the free traffic begins to move into our first step of cost savings to optimize our process. If we're paying for job postings that we shouldn't be paying for, we have cost leak, right? We're spending money where we don't need to spend, and we have the opportunity to recuperate that cost. The other thing that we're doing when we're maximizing our free traffic is we're making sure that we're applying our time as recruiters and TA leaders to the most efficient way to bring talent into the organization. As I said earlier, there's nothing more efficient than having the job posting go out there and having the right applicant apply to that role. this grinds against some common wisdom. Some of it is driven by the agency industry or the agency sector. I'm not saying it's entirely wrong, but many of us have heard, and some of us might have even said that, the passive talent is the best talent. I think that's a difficult statement to entirely get behind, right? The idea that somebody that knows our company, resonates with our employment value proposition, and has decided now is the time for them to consider a job change being lower quality is a difficult argument to make. Right? As leaders in corporate talent acquisition, that's actually our goal, right? We want to figure out how are we going to communicate a message to the marketplace that allows candidates and individuals to opt in and say, now is the time that I want to consider a conversation and pursue a career change with you. Most companies, when they maximize their free traffic, find that somewhere around 70% of their roles are able to be filled by an applicant, right? Each company is a little different. If your number is not that, I understand that there's variability from one company to another. But when we look at internal applicants, right, usually 15 to 20% internal mobility, employee referrals, somewhere between 15 and 25%, depending on how designed and well executed your employee referral program is, and then just natural organic traffic. We get to 70% really, really quickly. These are all free sources of talent, right? We haven't spent any money yet maximizing our free traffic. That leaves us with 30% left, right? Within this 30%, we're going to optimize our paid traffic, and we're going to figure out what requisitions require us to actually source and apply recruiter time to. Our key metrics as we're analyzing our free traffic and the channels that require sourcing are the individual source channel percentages, the direct applicant variability, right? So what does that mean? Which of our requisitions are going to be filled by direct applicants, right? And depending on the time of year and depending on the volume, where do we need to apply sourcing time? And which of our requisitions are going to be filled by an applicant fairly reliably? This is an important metric because this allows us as operators to begin applying recruiting time to some requisitions and not applying recruiting time to other requisitions. And then finally, we need to look at the recruiting hours per requisition and the percentage of recruiting hours, right? So the recruiting hours per requisition, if you're a recruiter now and you've got 40 requisitions that you're carrying, let's say you work 40 hours a week. Now, none of us work 40 hours a week, but the math is easier that way. That leaves you 1 hour per rec per week. You know how much gets done in 1 hour per rec per week? Basically nothing, right? Now, we may have little tips and tricks that we apply, right? Cutting our rec load in half and working on one set of recs 1 week and another set of recs another week. But the point is that we need to look at the number of recs that we're carrying versus how many hours we really have to work on them, right? And then finally, what's the percentage of our recruiting hours? If you work in a team where you have more than TA responsibilities, or even if you just work in a team where you are focused on talent acquisition exclusively, but the truth is that many people pop by your desk day in and day out, right, asking you if you can, walk a candidate from one room to another, or a little drive-by time zap where they drop a task off and ask you to stop what you're doing and go focus on that activity. It eats into your recruiting time, right? The recruiting time that we're preserving is key because it's going to be the time that we apply to sourcing, and it's going to be the time that we apply to making sure that the requisitions that won't be filled by direct applicants actually do get the attention that they need to. Once we've identified the requisitions that are going to be filled by applicants and those that require direct sourcing, we need to look at the way that we're designing our teams, right? If you've been in recruiting for 10 years, the last thing that you want to do is spend your entire day processing applicants. But if we're not processing our applicants, we've got huge value leak, right? 60 to 70% of our roles should be filled by applicants. We all know unemployment is at historic lows. Some people say that it's decreasing the number of applicants that we're getting. I'm skeptical, right, of that. I don't find historically that applicant rate is primarily driven by whether or not somebody is employed, but what it is uncontroversially doing is it is decreasing the amount of time that applicants are spending in the applicant process with individual companies, right? Candidates are moving on and off the market faster than they ever have before. But how do we design a team that at the same time as it provides the amount of manpower necessary to process all of our applicants, also provides the level of consulting and expertise that we need to keep our businesses confident and comfortable that we have the right level of individual leading recruitment for their requisitions. This is where running agile teams comes into play to make sure that we're able to cover both of those key objectives. If we run teams of 3, right? So if we look at these teams within the dotted lines, we're able to leverage a lot more agility and mobility in how we apply our recruiting resources without necessarily needing to increase the number of manager resources that we have on our teams, and also without needing to expose all of our business leaders and hiring managers to each of our team members, requiring us to go through change management and those difficult conversations of why are we moving my favorite recruiter from one place to another. Hiring is a point of stress, right? It's because we're growing, right? And we're wondering, are we going to be able to be successful hitting our goals? It's because somebody's resigned, right? And we're wondering, how are we going to, how are we going to keep up with the objectives that we've committed ourselves to? I'm a man down. Or because somebody's been promoted, right? It's a bittersweet moment. We're excited to see somebody advance, but now we've got an opening on our team, and I really liked Jane, right? Jane was an incredible employee. That's why she got promoted, but now I've got to backfill her. In order to be really effective at navigating the complexity, right, of the emotional aspect of hiring, the consulting aspect of, yes, I understand that Jane just got promoted and you love that she could do all these things, but now we're going out to the market and we need to recruit within what the market can provide. And the insight into how to maximize the impact of a team or time when we've got a whole bunch of competing priorities, right? Most recruiters that are really effective at this, they've got 7+ years experience, right? But if we're staffing our entire organization with recruiters that have 7+ years experience, we run out of budget really, really quickly, right? If all our recruiters are over $80,000 a year, those are very expensive individuals, and doing that at scale and doing that across our entire organization is difficult. The other thing that's really difficult is if somebody's making $80,000+ a year and they have over 7 years of recruiting experience, asking them to sit and disposition applicants all day is pretty challenging, right? It leads them to go back to their spouse and ask deep soul searching questions like, what's my purpose in life? What am I doing? I've been recruiting for 8 years and I'm spending my entire day dispositioning applicants. We know that we don't want those applicants to go unprocessed, right? Because that's 70% of our hires. That's a key value area to make sure that we capture. And from a cost perspective, we can't afford to have that leak out, right? If we go and have to source for all those roles because we're not getting to our applicants on time, there's no way that we can afford it. We also know that if we have to escalate our advertising strategy and pay for super expensive sponsored ads, we're going to burn through our marketing budget really, really quickly. So the way that you solve for this is you run tiger teams, right? Team 1, team 2 down here. Behind the lead recruiter, you're able to put individuals on those teams that are at the right skill set and the right career level to do the activity that is required. On the right-hand side is a team that has a lead recruiter and 2 recruiters, right? 2 individuals that, let's say they're somewhere between 1 to 4 years experience. They're at that point in their recruiting career. We're asking them to make sure that we don't have any applicant value leak is the right thing to do. We've got 3 people on the team, and 2/3 of the team are focused on applicant processing. This is the right team mix for a department where 60 to 70% of their hires are going to come from applicants. Now, we know that even if that's the organizational pattern, right, not every department is going to have 60 to 70% of their roles filled by applicants, right? So what do we do about the departments like statistical programming or engineering, right? You're not going to have 60% of your roles filled by applicants there. When you're running the tiger teams and you've got the ability to build behind the lead recruiter different textures of recruiters, you can actually compose the team according to the source channels, right? And so behind team 1 is a senior recruiter and a recruiter. You do always need to make sure that you're processing applicants. And if you're paying a senior recruiter $80,000+ a year, you probably don't want them processing applicants. But for your engineering team, you might need 2 senior recruiters because you know about maybe 30% of your hires are coming from applicants, and the rest you're going to have to go out and get. When you're running tiger teams or you're applying agile recruiting, it's important to understand the talent that goes into that team makeup, right? So there's 3 stages to recruiter development. The first stage is mechanics. For those of us that have come through the ranks as recruiters, you know the first year to year and a half is basically learning how to not mess up the process, right? If you were a quick study and you learn faster, God bless. But for a lot of us, it took a long time to make sure that you're not asking closed-ended questions, right? Do you have experience with C# programming is a terrible question, right? What languages do you have experience programming with is a good question. It takes some time as recruiters to get to a point where we're able to consistently execute the process from a mechanics perspective very, very effectively. This is a stage 1 recruiter, right? Or in the previous graph, this is somebody I refer to as just a recruiter. The next stage of recruiter development is style. Each of us motivate differently, right? There's a big part of recruiting, though, that is motivation. So we can't say to the other person exactly how it is that they're going to create desire, but we do know that great recruiters have the ability to cast a vision in the mind of a candidate and compel them that this is a part of your future and that you can go get it, right? We create desire where desire doesn't exist today. This is the domain of the senior recruiter, right? This is that recruiter that can go out into the marketplace and isn't dependent on making sure that the applicant is processed on time. It's not dependent on individuals that already know what they want. You can go out as a senior recruiter and motivate individuals. The last is project management. So here's where running agile teams is a little different from a leadership perspective than you might initially think. When we look at these lead recruiters here, the points of contact for the businesses, these individuals actually aren't your apex recruiters, right? These aren't the individuals that are really strong sourcers that can create desire in the mind of candidates or prospects. These are individuals that are really effective at making other people better because they're around that person, right? This is a sort of an individual that's on a management track. And as their career development develops, they're going to go forward and they're going to become an individual that manages teams as opposed to becoming a principal or executive level recruiter that does a phenomenal job unearthing and motivating talent, right? What makes that person unique is that they're able to get more work done with less time, right? They're able to carry a book of business that is greater than what one person could accomplish and figure out how to take these teams of 3, apply them, motivate them, and make sure that they keep on focus the key priorities that are necessary to drive the business forward and make sure that we stay out of the escalation mode that some of us can find ourselves in. Once we've maximized our applicants and made sure that we don't have value leak, right, that we're not sourcing on requisitions that we shouldn't be sourcing on, and we figured out a way to drive down our cost per recruiting hour by making sure that we're leveraging different stages in recruiter career and that we have individuals in charge of our ATS and making sure that all applicants are responded to in a position where they want to do that, right? If you are listening and you have 10 years of recruiting experience, I'd be really interested to hear your feedback if you stay on top of all of your applicants. If you do, excellent. But my experience talking with seasoned recruiters is they want to source or they want to consult or they want to do some of the activities that are rewarding and satisfying at the career level that they're at, right? But we need to make sure that as we're allowing senior recruiters to scratch that itch and to do things that are satisfying and interesting, that we're not doing it at the expense of our applicants. By fine-tuning our organizational design and fine-tuning our ability to capture our applicant value, we then get into a position where we're set up to cut budget, right? But we don't want to do that, right? We're set up to spend less than we're spending today to accomplish our goals. Before we go out and say that we're going to look at technology, we have one more step to take. We need to align ourselves with our executives, right? We need to make sure that when we look at the competing goods of cost, speed, and quality, that we're prioritizing the same values that our executives are prioritizing, right? We might be able to, say, oh, I can think of an executive that's going to tell you that you've got to accomplish all 3. And that's cute, right? Like, when you've got a C in your title, you get to say things like that. That's your prerogative. But the reality is that without innovation, right, without some kind of change to the rules of the game, these are competing goods, right? And we need to make decisions on how we're going to balance these priorities. If we have done the work internally of making sure that we've optimized our applicants, right, that we're not spending money or losing value on that traffic, and that we've optimized our delivery, right, so that we're not spending 80,000 plus on every single recruiter, or missing the opportunity to go in and process talent, we're able to free up budget and go to our executives and say, look, I want to understand for this department, for this initiative, or for our baseline call center recruiting, where does cost, quality, and speed balance for you? This gives you the last piece to the equation so that you can then estimate, here's what my total efficiency gained is going to be through improving our applicant capture, improving our organizational design, and finally, by making sure that we're not spending money on recruitment efforts that don't matter to our executives. They all matter, but you know what I mean, that aren't aligned with the level of prioritization for our executives, and that we are spending money where the pressure and the focus is going to come in so that we stay out of escalation mode. Once we've been able to balance applicant value capture, our own process design to make sure that we're running smoothly and not exceeding the bandwidth of any of our partners, our hiring managers or our recruiters, and that we're aligned with our executives, we're able to then finally go back out to the marketplace and go to great conferences like HR Tech and ask the market, what will help me accomplish my goals faster, right? We don't need to then at that point go out with an open question of tell me what you have. We're able to go back because we've designed our process, we've selected our talent, and now we get to pick our technology that drives our organization forward. And with that, I will pause and take any questions.
Keep on keeping. So far, so good.
All right, very good. We can pause here, Alexis, for any questions or thoughts.
Keep going. We're getting a lot of people that are just liking a lot of the things that you're saying. So just keep on keeping, because this is all great stuff. And I think everybody's just kind of absorbing.
Sure, fair enough. Well, that's the core of it, right? As I said at the start, where I'm coming from is really more from a let's nail our fundamentals and not get distracted by the shiny objects. I talk to a lot of TA leaders that want to know, which AI technology they need to integrate, or, if they want to use this CRM versus that CRM. And these are really important questions. But more often than not, when I get in and look at the way that the applicant tracking system is being managed, or the way that they're moving forward their marketing strategy, there's a lot of value leak, right? And it's difficult to figure out, how are we going to pay for these technologies? How are we going to pay for that AI that we want to build in to provide a chatbot experience? For example, this company that I was talking with that does retail level recruitment for fast food chains, being able to figure out how to get the right AI technology configured to provide consumer level experiences is pretty important. Because if you're getting off of a shift at 10 o'clock at night and you're on your way home and you want to talk to a recruiter, or that's your recruitable moment, missing that moment is a terrible thing, right? That's when you need to capture that person. But it's difficult to do that by having recruiters stay until 10 o'clock at night. And it's difficult to pay for that technology if every time you go back to do something innovative or different, you're asking for more money, right? So my experience has been that within each of our organizations is often the ability to find the dollars that we want to spend to invest in the technology that's going to drive us forward. But we need to find those dollars by focusing on optimizing a couple components, right? The first component to optimize is don't allow applicant value leak, right? The number of roles that can be filled by applicants, as long as we respond to them in 24 to 48 hours, is absolutely astonishing, right? And the reason that we don't get to them is through no fault of our own, right? It's not because we don't have great recruiters in our process, and it's not because as TA leaders, we don't want to make sure that our candidate experience is optimal. We've got individuals with a lot of experience that are being asked to do a lot of things. The other challenge that we get into is when we lose control of our process, right? When we're working according to the hiring manager that screams the loudest, as opposed to, in our expertise, the requisition that requires the most time, you fall behind in what can be a never-ending battle, right? How many of us have done a search or done some recruiting for the head of legal or the head of anything, frankly, right? And because this person's the head of something, their requisition gets undue time and undue focus. One of the most aged requisitions I ever saw at a client was the executive assistant for the general counsel, right? And the amount of hours and time and money that went into recruiting that executive assistant, it was probably about as much money as that executive assistant got paid, right? And it's losing control of the process because somebody else is telling us what we need to be focused on. Or if we have a requisition that's very fillable, right? Let me try and think of an example. These days, most requisitions that are fillable are actually quite tricky. But let's say a staff accountant, right? And I don't mean a staff accountant that has 4 years of Big Four experience. I just mean a staff accountant, right? Somebody with accounting experience. If we've fallen behind on staying on top of those applicants, right, that set of individuals that originally had raised their hands, they may have moved on, right? Individuals that are open to a career change tend to follow through with that interest, right? They write a resume, they put their, they put their feelers out there, and then they start enjoying what it feels like to be recruited, right? They start enjoying the image that recruiters cast for them on what their future could be if they make a career move, right? So if we've waited 14 to 21 days to get back to that applicant base is probably gone. And so now we're stuck as recruiters because we were fighting fires somewhere else and not able to get to the applicant base on that requisition. We end up sourcing. That's super expensive. It's super time consuming, right? And we lose control, right? And that's a major cost leak, because if you've got to apply a recruiter that has a whole bunch of experience to sourcing that staff accountant, now one, they're not working on something else, and you may be having a set of individuals that are far too senior working on requisitions that are far too junior. The other challenge that happens when we're trying to find this budget is if all of your team is the same nature, right? If all of your team is the level of recruiter that's able to go out and consult with hiring managers, you probably overstaffed. And any of the recruiters on the phone, don't shoot me, right? Forgive me for saying that. But what I'm trying to lead towards is that if you've got a senior recruiter, allow them to do senior recruiter work, right? Allow them to do the consulting, allow them to do the shaping of the opinion. We've all got a hiring manager. When Jane got promoted, that what they do when they come to the recruiting team is they say, I want you to go find me Jane, right? But the truth is that Mr. Hiring Manager, let's call him Mark, you created Jane over the last decade, right? Jane does not exist in the wild. You slowly taught Jane the skill set and the capabilities that are uniquely fit to your needs as a manager and to your business unit. Now we're going out to market and we need to recruit what's on market, right? That's a tough conversation. That's not something that a junior recruiter is going to be able to go in and navigate without getting slaughtered, right? It's convincing the hiring manager that they created a skill set that may not be something that they're immediately going to go out and find on the marketplace, and helping them prioritize of the capabilities that are available on the market at the price you're willing to pay. How are you going to pick the most important ones and make sure that they make a decision, right? That's a sophisticated point of view, and that's a sophisticated recruiter. You probably don't want that person at the same time going through and looking at 120 resumes a day to make sure that you don't have applicant value leak. When we get these things optimized, my experience is that about 15 to 20% of budget in a TA department can be reallocated. Depending on the size of your department, that can be a pretty significant chunk of budget. That budget reapplied to technology that is going to optimize your process, right? And optimize your particular process is really, really effective and much easier to get approval from executives on when you're not telling them, hey, I need you to increase my budget by 10%, or I need you to increase my budget by 15%. You're able to go back as a TA leader and say, I've been able to find 15% cost savings. Here's the project plan to unlock those funds within my department. I want to make sure that we're aligned on the priorities of cost, quality, and speed. And then once I've unlocked this funding, I'm going to reallocate that to an AI chatbot, or I'm going to reallocate that money to an automated CRM so that we're doing a better job building relationships with talent that may not be considering a job change today, but if we do a good job building a relationship with them, they're more likely to choose our company or our firm when they do make a job change.
I do have a question came in. When you have a company that has not used the agile style of recruitment team building, how difficult do you think it will be, and what challenges do you see?
Yeah. So I'll share that I have a lot of experience with that because this is the team design model that I promote with my clients. So here's the crux of it, right? I think the number one challenge is identifying how to establish the competency and understand what this lead recruiter looks like. When I work with companies that want to roll out an agile TA framework, the first instinctual position is to say that the lead recruiter should be my top recruiter, right? And I'll offer sort of the cautionary wisdom that that's probably going to end up not being as effective. If your top recruiter enjoys being a high impact individual that motivates markets and wins over that tough to please hiring manager, it can be difficult to ask them from going from a high impact, high reward function of persuading hiring managers and finding those needle in the haystack candidates to focusing on making somebody else better, right? So if you can get the lead recruiter role right, you've tackled the biggest challenge you're going to need to tackle. The lead recruiter is really somebody that's strong with project management and strong with prioritizing the needs of other people, right? If they ask themselves, instead of how do I make sure that I look good, if they ask themselves, how do I make other people more effective? That's beginning to find the person that is the right lead recruiter. You want to put that person in the role, understanding that they do need to be a strong consultant because they're an interface for you with the business, but they're not necessarily going to be the shining star in all circumstances. They're there to make sure that the program runs and the team is set up to succeed, right? So get the lead recruiter right and understand that that is a future leader or a future manager and not necessarily just your top recruiter. The next thing to do is to work on team building and make sure that communication practices are effective, because what you're going to do running this is you're going to put, let's say that the average rec load for your recruiter is 30 recs. What you're going to do is you're going to put about 90 requisitions on this lead recruiter. So the team needs to get pretty comfortable having probably 15-minute daily meetings to reassess priorities and look at progress against the requisitions that we have assumed are going to be filled by an applicant or be filled by a sourced candidate, right? So the second thing is to get a management cadence that makes sure that the information flows as effectively as possible. And then the third is to ensure across the entire team, there's some common point of view around the role of applicants, right? A candidate experience initiative or some user experience focus is helpful in making sure that the values are established in the team to put the time into what can seem like a mundane activity, but unlocking the power of an agile team and unlocking the cost savings that's in this technique is dependent on making sure that you don't have value leak at the applicant level, right? So the first thing is get the lead recruiter role right, and it's not necessarily your top recruiter. The second is establish communication practices that allow the information to flow freely. And then the third is make sure that candidate experience is a high enough priority that it doesn't feel like a setback for anybody, to make sure that all applicants are touched in 48 hours at the most. That's a good question.
I have another question. Do you think full cycle recruiters are still valuable?
I absolutely think full cycle recruiters are still valuable, but let me make sure as I offer my thoughts on this that they're in the right context. I'm looking at talent acquisition departments running at scale. Here are some of the challenges with a full cycle only strategy. full cycle recruiter strategies are very difficult to scale up and to scale down. If that's a contentious statement, I'll unpack that further, but let me just allow you to tell me you don't agree with that. But one of the first starting points is scaling up and scaling down a full cycle recruiter team is quite difficult. The other is that a full cycle recruiter that is of the competency level necessary to be the relationship manager for the business, to be the recruiter that can source for the roles that won't be filled by applicants, is often a more expensive and more experienced person than the type of person I would want making sure all applicants are responded to in a timely fashion, right? So I think that they're very valid. I think that they still have a key role in what we're doing. They're very applicable in IT departments, for example, where you just aren't going to get to a point. I would be surprised if any of us in our companies have more than 15% of our roles in IT being filled by an applicant, right? That is just an incredibly market motivating centric role, right? So full cycle recruiters, absolutely. But from a team design perspective, I think that we need to balance the application of full cycle recruiters with the application of an agile team design like this so that we can scale effectively and so that we're also not investing $80,000 plus in a resource to make sure that our applicants are touched within 48 hours.
Awesome. Somebody wants to know, then where does the sourcer fit into the new team?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So one of the challenges that I've found with the sourcing function is building the relationship between the recruiter and the sourcer. It isn't always straightforward, right? So there's a couple relationship dependencies that need to really be tightly bedded down, or you've got we didn't talk about this, but another area of value leak, right? If you're not on the same page as your recruiter and you're a sourcer, how often as sourcers do we send over candidates that we know are open to a conversation, but we're motivating that candidate to move forward? If there's a gap, right, and that recruiter's not able to prioritize reaching out to that candidate in a couple days, or they just don't see the vision for that candidate that you see, and they just don't follow through, that ends up making the sourcer-recruiter relationship really tenuous. The second challenge is if you have technology that your company's invested in and you're not both using it the same way, right? Let's say you've invested in Avature as an organization and your recruiter, I'll pick on the recruiter a little bit, right? The recruiter doesn't have to adopt, right? The recruiter's getting away with it and they're not adopting the technology because they've been in the company and they've been in the job for 15 years. And so people, kid glove the recruiter a little bit, but you're a sourcer and you need to operate within that environment. It's really difficult to be effective, to be measurable, and to track what you're doing if you've got that grit between you and the recruiter, right? So on one hand, there's relationship grit, and on the second hand, there's technology grit if you're not both adopting the investments your company's making at the same time. So what I do, if I'm going to build a team that's going to have sourcers, is I actually link the recruiter and the sourcer in one of these tiger teams, right? So that instead of putting a recruiter on that team, if we're putting together a team of 3, I dedicate the sourcer to that. Now, I think that if you're going to invest in a sourcer, it's got to be a role or a function area that really requires sourcing, right? So I know this is a bit of an absurd comparison, but if you're staffing for call centers all throughout the country, the chances that you need a call center for that department in your company is pretty low, right? But if you're staffing IT departments and you need a whole bunch of C# or Java programmers, yeah, you need a sourcer. I don't like the models that have the sourcers as just shared services that dotted line all over the place, because those two challenges, right, technology adoption and relationship alignment, have a real ability to undermine the value a sourcer can generate. So I try and address those two challenges by linking the sourcer as close as possible to a recruiter, or at most 2 recruiters, so that there isn't value leak between the work that a sourcer is doing to motivate the marketplace and the work that the recruiter is doing to turn that motivated individual to an actual candidate the hiring manager is selecting against. So I embed the sourcer into the tiger team if a sourcer is going to be involved.
Awesome. Those are great answers. And we actually are right at 3 o'clock because you're awesome and filled up all that time for us, which I really appreciate because that was very interesting. And we're actually, of course, getting a couple more questions coming in, but want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we're going to go ahead and end it for now. But as I said at the very beginning, everybody, it was recorded. Hooray! So we're going to email all of you within about 24 hours with a copy of this recording. Keep the questions coming because I will be glad to send them to Steve directly, and he can reach out to you personally. So with that being said, Steve, thank you. It was such a wonderful webinar. I learned a lot as always. Are there any final parting words before we go ahead and close out for the day?
No, just appreciate your guys' time, and let's keep doing great work. Right, recruiting is a high impact sport, so let's keep doing high impact stuff. Thank you, guys.
Awesome, thanks, Steve, and thank you, everybody, and have a great day. And good luck out there in the world of recruiting.
Bye, everybody.